Bien, mesdames, messieurs, chers collègues.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'd like to call the meeting to order. We're starting half an hour late, and we can't go beyond 7 p.m. Therefore, we've got to remain focused, and we need to cut back slightly our double session. We're dealing with two topics, basically, the MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework post-2020, and then the second session will be devoted to the European Union system of own resources and the budget. Therefore, I must call on all those wishing to speak to be concise. In any event, allow me to wish you a very warm welcome to the European Parliament, particularly to those who are visiting us from national parliaments, and of course a warm welcome to colleagues from the European Parliament, but particularly a welcome to Evgenia Angelova, Deputy Chair of the Finance and Budgetary Committee of the National Assembly of the Republic of Bulgaria. She's going to be chairing the second panel of this joint interparliamentary committee meeting. These meetings are, I think, very important to strengthen links between national parliaments and the European Parliament, particularly on issues pertaining to taxation and budgets. The first session of our meeting will be devoted to the multi-annual financial framework after 2020. We need to address emerging challenges and new priorities, and of course we need to work out how to finance these. This is a key moment for discussion between national parliaments and the European Parliament. The European Parliament's Budget Committee decided to draw up two strategic initiative reports, one, first of all, on the multi-annual financial framework and another on the reform of the own resources system. These are to be adopted in committee this week and adopted by plenary next month. Now, own resources means customs duty. We keep on signing trade deals, but even so, customs duties only account for about 10% of own resources. The idea of our reports is to give input, which will be used by the Commission. We can look forward to a paper from them in May this year. Now, let me give you a few basic game rules for here. First of all, how can one take the floor? Well, we'll do our very best to ensure that as many members as possible can contribute, even if we have restricted speaking time. And of course, the plenary went on for longer, so it hasn't helped. We have a large number of participants, so I'm afraid that it won't be possible for everybody to speak, in all likelihood. And we'll sort of have to catch up a bit tomorrow afternoon. So I really would ask you to restrict yourself to 2 minutes when you speak. The time will be indicated on the stopwatch. Depending on discussions, we may need to cut that back further, and we may end up having to be extremely strict on this. You see speaking cards in two colors here on your desk. The green one, that's for the multi-annual financial framework session. The other card is yellow. That's for the second session, the new own resources system. So if you wish to speak, fill in one of the cards and submit it to one of our ushers. This rule is applicable to MEPs as well as national parliamentarians. By and large, we'll try to break down speaking time as follows. 2 national parliamentarians followed by an MEP, broadly speaking. And if needed, Madam Chair, we can adopt this methodology during the debate. So to kick off, I'll give the floor to our 2 rapporteurs for the own initiative report for the multi-annual financial framework, Jan Albrecht and Isabel Thomas. I don't know who's going to speak first. Ms. Thomas. I'll be speaking French. First of all, I'd like to welcome you to the European Parliament, dear members of national parliaments. So, in a sense, you're our other half. That's the way we see it in Strasbourg or here. And we're your other half. We vote expenditure, but of course you vote on income, on resources. Usually we ought to work very closely together in close conjunction, and regrettably we very rarely meet. Very rarely do we have the opportunity to engage in discussions with you, and I think that this degree of complicity, of cooperation, should be increased as much as possible. Some would have us believe that our interests are at loggerheads, or at the very least very different. The current structure of the EU's budget, and particularly the nature of resources of income, all of this means that people get the wrong-headed impression that if you decrease the EU's budget, you're increasing the national budget, and vice versa. If you increase the European budget, it's a cut on the national budget. It's a sort of zero-sum game that is being suggested here. I don't want to go into the substance of this because the speakers on own resources will do this, but for us it's very important to change the structure of EU resources and income. That's why with the Budgets Committee we proposed that the future financial framework be made conditional on an improvement, an amendment to these structures. Contrary to what you might have heard, it's not because we want the EU's budget to take on a life of its own. No. It's a question of rescuing the EU's budget, and if we rescue the budget and preserve it, we will also save the European Union, because everything currently being prepared, everything that is being said, or everything, let me put it this way, everything we're hearing is that the 2040 to 2080 multi-annual financial framework was smaller than the previous one. That's if you take account of the accession of Croatia. The current financial framework has been undermined by all sorts of cuts. And there have been all sorts of incidents, perhaps one-offs, that have had an impact too. They've all had an impact. For the first victims are our fellow citizens who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of this budget. Think of cities and regions for cohesion policies, research laboratories for research, or students getting Erasmus. They have been impacted by these unfortunate developments. For the upcoming multi-annual financial framework, such as it taking shape, we are facing serious contradictions, just as we are with the current MFF. And the kind of contradictory speeches we hear confuse our citizens. We're telling our citizens that in addition to standard old-style policies, agriculture, cohesion, and so forth, the EU is going to take on all sorts of other duties. Europe is going to look after refugees. Europe will take in hand the fight against terrorism, defence, or at least the defence industry. Europe is going to promote public investment, and so on and so forth. So Europe is going to do all of this without anybody has suggested that additional money be funded, because those that make these grandstanding announcements don't talk about the funding. We're reasonable. We try and do our job properly in the Budgets Committee, so we have to say that this kind of situation cannot continue. Now, yes, we would agree. We built Schengen without asking about borders properly. The international context is difficult, and we do need investment in European defence. But we can't do that without additional money. That's the situation we find ourselves in. That's why we really want to start asking seriously about having a European budget that can meet the headline goals we've heard about. Now, according to discussions in the Council, and it would seem that the 12 billion funding gap that will result from Brexit should not be offset by new resources, new incomes. We're being told that priorities have to be reviewed, that there will be cuts in a number of old standard programs or policies. The Budgets Committee has not yet voted on these reports, so everything I'm saying now is subject to that proviso. It all depends on the vote on Friday. And of course, we also don't know how the vote will go in plenary next March. But it would seem that if we don't necessarily have a consensus, there does seem to be a broad majority on the essential points here in the European Parliament. First of all, traditional policies are policies based on solidarity, such as the European Social Fund or the Cohesion Fund or the agricultural policy. They're all investment policies. They are indissociable from the single market. We don't think to start saying that we're going to slash the fundamental pillars of the European Union because we've got these other policy priorities. These other policies are the foundation stones of the EU, and yet people want to build the house and extend the house. If you want to build a house extension, you don't start undermining the foundations. That's the way we see it in the European Parliament. These policies are about solidarity. They are all about the single market. They are policies that our citizens pin high hopes on. And also I point out that these are very important investment policies, particularly the cohesion policy. It's the main investment budget in the European Union. We're hearing whispers that one solution would be to ring-fence cohesion policies for regions that are facing the most serious difficulties. The trouble with that particular choice for the longer term, perhaps not for the short term, is that member states that don't benefit much or don't benefit at all from cohesion policy will end up getting fed up, and that this logic of fair returns of net players will just become still worse. We think that this thinking about fair returns is completely obsolete and wrong-headed. Everybody benefits from these investments. Everybody, regardless of whether you're classified as a net payer or not. We often take the example. Did I not have 10 minutes? All right. All right, I'll wind up. I wasn't apprised of the fact that I didn't have 10 minutes. Anyway, allow me to conclude by saying that we just basically totted up the figures. What would it mean to keep current policies at current levels? That's already a problem. Then add to that the new policies that we added in the financial framework, policies that worked, such as youth unemployment initiatives, or refugees, or borders. So these were added to the budget. We also took account of Council's requirements on future defence or defence industry policies. So we added all the figures up, and our result is that for the future financial framework we need a ceiling of 1.3% of GDP just to make ends meet. This is very reasonable indeed to keep the show on the road. This may shock some of you. You may be still keen on the 1%, but the 1.3% is very reasonable, because if you don't accept that, if you don't accept the 1.3% of GNA, then we've got to review the ambitions, and we don't want that in the European Parliament, not the majority anyway. Thank you, Ms. Tomat. Co-rapporteur, Mr. Jan Olbrich now, please.
Yes, sir.
7.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. Just some additional remarks. As a co-rapporteur to Madame Thomas, I'm from Poland. I will speak English just to facilitate a little bit the whole debate. And the real question we are facing all together, the national parliaments and we in the parliament, is: do we know exactly what will happen after 2020? The question is, do we know what will happen after 2020 with the European budget and, of course, different activities also made by the member states? The answer is very clear. We don't know. We know that there will be no British after March 2019, and now the whole debate, which has been described by Madame Thomas, is the debate what we expect from European Union after 2020. This is first question. What do we expect from European Union? What will be European Union after 2020? What we would like to do together, and what will be the common activity and how much it will cost? Where is the money? It's like saying that we will do everything. No. Where is the money, and what is the political decision? The second question is, will we be ready with money after 2020 for operational programs, for structural funds? Will it be ready or not? To be ready, the 1st of January 2021, we should finalize everything at the latest half of 19. What we think as a parliament is to finalize at least MFF regulation before the European elections. If we don't finalize this, it will take time, probably 19 and 20, and everything will be late, which will be not new in European Union. But we would like to avoid it, and we would like to start immediately after 2020. So this is the political question. Are we ready to do it quickly? I mean, during 6-7 months, which normally takes 2 years. And this is quite interesting example, because it requires the agreement between the governments the member states, and the agreement with the European Parliament. Just to remind you that with the annual budget, we will have the voting with the qualified majority inside the Council. For the MFF, we will have the unanimity in the Council. So that's why it's different procedure, and next, after unanimity, Council will send it to the Parliament, and according to the constant procedure, we will have the chance to say yes or no. And of course, we are ready to do it. We are ready to cooperate just now, not waiting for the Council, but we want the Council and the Member States, including national parliaments, to have this political will to do it together as soon as possible. And because if not, we will not be ready before the elections. And I mean, it doesn't mean European Parliament, it means we, European Union, will not be ready before the change of European Commission, before the change of the President of the European Council. We will not be ready. So politically speaking, I mean, everything will be open or reopened. So just to finalize, and I think that will be also the debate, and also tomorrow we'll speak about the MFF. The MFF debate is a debate about all the policies of European Union. And this is the political debate concerning the future of the EU after Brexit. And it's not only how much it will cost, the question is, what would you like to do after Brexit together? Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Olbricht.
Thank you, Mr. Olbrich. We'll now move on to the rapporteur for the 2018 budget, Mr. Viotti. He had 10 minutes, but he's been kind enough to agree to only 7 minutes, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we've got Italy as the budget rapporteur. So I'd like to thank the chairman. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, because I think this parliamentary week has always been extremely important in order to lay down action that we would like to take together in our work. And this year, we have a lot of work to do. We've heard from Mrs. Thomas and Mr. Albrecht on the MFF, and for next year's budget we really have to pull up our socks and get to work. So this year, 2018, is going to be extremely relevant. We'll have the Commission's opinion on the procedure and the new financial code, and then we'll also be wrapping up Brexit negotiations. So, therefore, the 2019 budget procedure will be a procedure full of challenges. This is the last budget that we will be adopting under this current MFF. And for this Parliament, it is the last opportunity to make sure that our political priorities will continue after this. So we have the usual activities that are included in the annual budget of the European Parliament, development, research and other areas. But the three priorities that I would like to focus on are the building of a real social pillar, because I think that social policy, the EU social policy, has to be used as a tool to make sure that citizens regain trust in us. Then, of course, we have migration flows, and we have to tackle the issue of migration, and we also have to continue helping those countries where migrants come from, because in the long term we have to eradicate the root causes of migration. And then we also have to strengthen the European defence policy. In Gothenburg, our heads of state and government focused on the social pillar because they also want to focus on youth employment. Last year, thanks to some extent by the excellent work done by my predecessor, Mr. Mureşan, we got an increase of almost 400 million euro. In 2019, we're going to have new appropriations that will be allocated to the Youth Guarantee Fund. A lot has been done, but this area is still underfunded. It's chronically underfunded, and then we need to strengthen EASO, Frontex, and programs to help migrant integration, and we need to invest in tackling root causes of migration. The European Commission has been working on a preparatory action to the tune of 12 million euro linked to the agreement signed by the High Representative Mogherini with the defence ministers of the member states. So this is on defence. And this will help us make progress in this area, and we need to make sure that we have this European Defence Fund so that Europe is an international player on the world stage, and that so we can achieve the goals we have set ourselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, if we want to achieve all of this, we need a strong budget. So the 2019 budget has to be robust. It shouldn't be about the juste retour. It has to be about our policies. Over the last few years, we have had a more individual approach to EU budgets with external financial tools that aren't included in the budget and that are therefore not subject to the proper parliamentary scrutiny that they should be subject to. Over the last few years, we have looked at the adoption of the tools. I'm thinking of EFSI in particular. There is still a need to protect the powers of the European Parliament as enshrined in the treaties, not because the European Parliament just feels they're important. They are enshrined in the treaties. We have to be careful, because we don't want the technocrats to be taking the decisions and not just have, and people feel that it's not the politicians that are involved. So we have to focus also on what the Council is doing. On the one hand, the Council wants the EU to take more and more initiatives in order to overcome the shortcomings of the member states, but at the same time it's reluctant to give more generous contributions to the EU budget. It is reluctant to have a bigger budget. So let us work together and use these last days of our work to have a debate on this so that you can go back to your capitals, to your parliaments and your member states to put pressure on your own governments. So please help us put pressure on them. I think everyone has to do that. I mean, the same applies to the Italian government. We'll have to wait and see what the Italian government will look like because we've got elections around the corner on the 4th of March and it won't be plain sailing, I can tell you that. And then we often have a very divisive approach to negotiations. We need to overcome that. I don't want to speak for longer than the speaking time given to me, but I think we need to come up with a common strategy for our work. We are the only elected representatives, the proper representatives of the people, the MEPs and MPs, so we need a common strategy that will allow us to work together so that at the end of the year we will have a robust budget that will allow us to meet the challenges in the future and that will also mean that European citizens can feel more tranquil about the future. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Viotti.
Thank you, Mr. Viotti. He touched upon the impact of a rigid multi-annual financial framework. If we've created a sort of rigid corset for expenditure for 7 years and then unexpected needs arise, we need to think up of sort of budgetary outliers to allow us to deal with these things. This is what we call the budgetary galaxy. This is what it looks like. Trust funds, financial instruments, and an assortment of other satellites. I mean, I don't know if national parliaments can get to grips with this. What we do is take some money out of the European budget and then ask around the member states. I mean, there's not a great deal of scrutiny over that kind of thing. Certainly, it's outside the scrutiny of the European Parliament, and that's a topic that I think we need to be watchful of. We need to bring the threads together and come back to the unity of the budget, that there's just one budget. Thank you, Mr. Viotti. You stuck to your speaking time for 7 minutes. Jordi Soler has just joined us. You have 7 minutes, Mr. Soler, if you want.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Let me extend my warm welcome to our colleagues from other parliaments. And I would like to highlight some points concerning the upcoming MFF, some basic ideas that to our group are important. First point is that the post-2020 MFF, like indeed any other budget, but more so for a budgetary framework that provides the basis for several years, 7 years so far, is not only about figures, but mainly about a political vision. A budget translates a vision, political project, priorities into figures. So first we need to identify what we want to do, what we have to do, what we don't need to do anymore, and what we don't want to do at all. We need to identify where are we heading to in terms of political goals, and then discuss how do we translate these goals into numbers. Then the basic issue is that we have common goals and that we decide how to finance them. But the question is, do we have these common goals? Do we have right now a shared vision on what the European Union should become in the next couple of years? Did we do an intense debate and deep debate on the future of Europe before discussing in depth the next financial framework? And besides debating, if debated was, did we reach any agreed conclusion? Despite the good intentions from the European Commission, I have my doubts about that. Secondly, to know where we are heading to, it's also important to know where are we now. And the reality is that the EU budget amounts just to 1% of the combined gross national income of the member states and means around 2% of the public spending in the European Union. And there's been a decreasing trend during the last decades, despite the fact that challenges of all kinds have indeed intensified. So, to me, the current budget doesn't show high ambition and a clear political commitment towards a stronger, more integrated European Union. Therefore, I think we here in the Parliament, we need to be ambitious and propose a volume of resources for the next MFF that reflects both political will and commitment towards a more integrated, a stronger European Union. Third point. To us, the budget must be clearly aligned with the goal of sustainable development, being it defined in a comprehensive way. In other words, the EU budget should provide for a European response to the challenges of sustainable development, for a known European response to these very pressing challenges. So we propose that the next MFF concentrates and covers priorities such as tackling growing inequalities between people and territories within the European Union, a budget that focuses on the protection of the planet by fighting against climate change and fostering energy transition. In 2015, as you know, in Paris, all member states and the EU signed and later on ratified the Paris Climate Agreement, but now it's time to deliver. The EU budget should be green, and if some years ago Mr. Barroso proposed to have at least 20% of climate-related spending, we must now significantly increase this share to at least 30% in the next MFF, in order to take into account the new EU's international commitments like the already mentioned Paris Agreement or the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also think that the methodology to calculate the climate-related spending should be revised and clarified in order to be climate agreement compatible, to be more comprehensive for the institutions and the project managers, and to ensure a proper monitoring. Another priority should be to invest more in our future, to invest more in future generations through programs and actions like Erasmus or Youth Employment Initiative, invest more in future technology through research programs, in future infrastructure, and also, because we tend to forget culture, also to invest more in culture. Expenditure for research and innovation should be significantly increased with a specific focus on environmentally and socially relevant aspects. Only 9% of overall research expenditure in the current research framework are dedicated to green research and development, unchanged compared to the previous framework program. And concerning Connecting Europe facility, these investments should also focus more on cross-border clean energy and transport networks. Another priority, and I will be concluding for our group, is that the EU should also conduct a proactive migration and integration policy. And this goal should be included in the next MFF. Because I am afraid that when discussing migration, the predominant talk in the EU concentrates too much on securization and externalization of borders. But the EU needs to make its own contribution towards a clever management of migration flows, making them legal and safe, allocating more funds to humanitarian assistance, setting up functioning resettlement programs or alternative legal structures to encourage countries to admit more refugees, and implementing integration policies enabling migrants and refugees to education and legal work. And very last point, we believe that the EU must be politically and financially consistent. By this, I mean that what we do, what we want to achieve within the EU should also be promoted outside the EU, in the world. So we have to promote democracy, peace, human rights, and of course, sustainable development. And for this, we need a stronger Europe as a global actor. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Soleil. Now I would like to give the floor to the colleagues who've requested the floor. Now, the only green papers that we've got are from national parliaments. None of the MEPs seem to have indicated that they would like to take the floor. I see some green cards going up. First of all, Mrs. Anne Mulder from the Dutch Parliament.
Ik ben geen mevrouw, maar een heer.
I'm a lady. I do apologize. Mr. Mulder. I think that the key issue is a choice that you can only spend €1 once. And that's something that everyone needs to be aware of. And that means that in politics we have to make difficult choices. And if you say that you're going to spend more money, you have to say where you're going to save. And I'm a little bit unsettled when I hear we need to talk about objectives, not just saying that the Parliament needs to spend more and convince our governments that that is necessary. But if you want to spend more, that means that national parliaments either have to make savings themselves or increase taxes. And you can be sure that that's not something that will make us popular. If you say that you have to either increase taxes or make cuts to health care. These are things that are not popular with cities. And the EU will be smaller as a result of Brexit, and that would the logical consequence would be that they would be have a smaller budget. And I think first of all we have to look at the effectiveness and efficiency of current expenditure. And when the Court of Auditors comes along and shows us photographs of empty airports and things like that. These are things that Dutch citizens don't like. And what about European taxation? I know that there's some discussion about that. But when Dutch citizens hear that there's going to be European taxation, they get rather upset. So please don't go down that avenue. And so the question is, what should Europe do? Well, Europe should deal with big cross-border issues that we can't deal with at national level. I'm thinking about migration, the climate, security. And I think we have to look at what can be covered by the current budget. And these are the things that we should be focusing on. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mulder. And now, Mrs. Marquez.
Merci, Président.
Thank you very much. I would also like to thank all of the speakers, the rapporteurs and shadow rapporteurs, and all of the information that they've given us about the work that's ongoing with regard to the MFF. And there are three things that I would like to raise. The first is on cohesion, and I can support the concerns that Isabel expressed, particularly if we want cohesion to be made more fragile, if we want to undermine cohesion. Cohesion policy needs to be strong and needs to be able to meet new challenges, and that's why I talk about a new generation of cohesion policies, because we need to integrate other policies in cohesion policy. For instance, when we talk about integration of migrants, as the Spanish colleague has just done, when we're talking about major cities, access to employment, etc., these really are cohesion policies within these large cities. And so the cohesion policy needs to match the new challenges and not be undermined. And secondly, on own resources, it is true that we need to increase the participation by member states. There are proposals on the table, and we need to start a negotiation so that we can make clear to member states that aren't in favour of contributing more. We need to convince them that there are these new challenges and make it clear to them that protecting borders and defence policy is a policy which affects the countries which have difficulty in contributing more to the budget. And our Prime Minister has said that he is open to the development of a financial transaction tax and a taxation on the digital economy and also a tax on the carbon economy. We will be having a second session a little bit later on own resources. The third thing I wanted to say is that the Portuguese Parliament has set up a special committee to monitor the MFF negotiations, either at the moment, during the negotiations at the moment where the new concepts are being presented, and then later as part of the bilateral negotiations. The Chair, thank you very much. And now we will hear from a Portuguese MEP, José Manuel Fernandes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Everyone knows that we have great ambitions within the European Union, and the 2020 strategy is the proof of that. And everyone signed up to that strategy, all the member states, all the parliaments. And with 1% of the GNI, we want to do everything. This is a budget which is rather small compared to the level of ambition that we have. And we find ourselves in a difficult position because our discussion shouldn't be with this method. We should be adding things up. It shouldn't be a top-down method, but rather a bottom-up method, and not a method of subtraction, because every member state should be saying what they want. And then, of course, they would have to agree on what they want. What do they want for research and innovation? What do they want for young people? What do they want for cohesion? What do they want for immigration, migration, solidarity? And then we'll add up all of those things, and we'd see what the amount is that we come out with. But what we do is we work the opposite way round. We say there's 1.1%, the Parliament says 1.3%, for something very simple, because the objectives of the 2020 strategy haven't been met. We've got challenges that we have to face in terms of security, defence and migration. And we need to be able to provide the answers that citizens expect. And Brexit is another tragedy. That's going to mean 10 billion euros less per year. And we're talking about 170. It's not a huge amount, but it would make it possible for us to answer these challenges. And I'll be concluding in a moment. And it's not really something that the Council should be against, because if we look at all of the declarations and statements made by member states, even 1.3% is not enough to cover all of the expectations that they're giving rise to. Okay, thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And now let me give the floor to Vasil Kokos from Romania.
Mulțumesc, domnule președinte. Dezbaterea privind viitoarea finanțare a Uniunii Europene nu poate avea loc fără a ține cont de lecțiile învățate.
We have to learn the lessons from the past. From the current MFF, and in this MFF, the amounts which have been available to the EU have been used to have the resources necessary and in order to be able to meet the political crises that the EU has to face. But nevertheless, the low level of resources available in the current MFF are insufficient to meet all of the political ambitions of the EU. And so for that reason, we need a reform of the structure of European resources, as has been proposed by the high-level group chaired by Mario Monti in 2016. And these proposals should make it possible for us to have a more stable and sustainable MFF and make it possible to provide transparency to citizens. And for that reason, we need a true system of own resources which can represent additional resources in the European budget, at least 50% more than the budget provided by member states. And so we need to have the right balance between the resources provided by member states and those raised through other methods. At the moment, European citizens don't have a great deal of confidence in the policies being developed at EU level. And why is that? Well, in recent years, there have been funding mechanisms which have been set up for a whole range of objectives. And these have been set up without the necessary controls. And so it is important that we provide transparency to citizens. We need a way of explaining this system. It's too complicated, and we need to change the architecture of the financing system. And for that reason, we need to have an EU budget which would be in line with the priorities of citizens. Thank you. Now, let me give the floor to Joël Giraud from the French National Assembly.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, I think even if we're going to be talking about resources in the second session, we understand that Brexit is going to lead to complications, and this really is a time for us to discuss a number of issues. And one thing I really would like to stress, I have already mentioned it last year in Tallinn, which is the refunds. You know that France is against the rebates. It's something that we repeat constantly, and we pay 1 billion more than some large countries and particularly with the VAT rates, which are a special kind of rebate. And I think that in this debate, France is willing to see an increase in its contribution, but of course that will depend on the contributions which are made by others. And I'm very pleased to see in the agreement in Germany between the CDU and the SPD something on these contributions and on cohesion. Just to be very brief, this is something which has been mentioned. Now, it is true that these funds are essential, particularly with the EU project. But nevertheless, I do think it is understandable that those who are better off help those who are worse off. That's a principle of solidarity. But could we not envisage having a focus on areas that are suffering from globalization, or those who have adopted macro-regional strategies, because these really guarantee European integration, and I would really like us to explore these issues. Let me now give the floor to a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Gardia Sabal.
Sí, muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much. Well, we talk about budgets and the future of the European Union. We've heard we have to do more with less. I find this phrase striking because when you get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of the policies, it is a fallacy. We're deluding ourselves. And I think that this is the first thing that we need to be clear about. If we want to do more, then we have to put money where our mouth is. We have to put more money in the budget. Otherwise, there will be less European policies because we're not willing to allocate allocate more appropriations. And the proof that this is the case is in this very MFF. Take the refugee crisis, the mass influx of migrants, when we wanted to come up with an investment plan and set up the European Solidarity Corps. What did we have to do? We had to cut other programs and take money away from other programs in order to do it. And this is clear proof that you can't do more with less. So we have to take the right decisions. We have to decide on whether we want to still have a CAP, a common agricultural policy. Do we still want one? Are we going to make the policy national again? We have to see, well, and then the cohesion policy, if we make changes, then parts of the EU might not be able to benefit. Yes, it is solidarity based on the wealthy giving to the less wealthy, but I think it has helped a lot, and it has helped even wealthier regions do well. The same applies to defence and research, development and innovation, and so many examples have been given here this afternoon. The second point I would like to talk about is flexibility, because we're going to be deciding today what's going to happen over the next 10 years, because we don't have all the answers, because we don't even have all the questions. We need flexibility. We need to reach an agreement before the elections in 2019. That's why it's important to have national parliaments here. You need to put pressure on your governments. It's vital. What Portugal has done with the monitoring committee is extremely important. Good on you. If we don't reach an agreement before the elections in 2019, we'll be wasting 2 years.
John Lahart.
Let me give the floor now to Jean Lahart, who is from the Budget Committee of the Irish Parliament.
Thanks, Mr. President. Just some brief points. I note from the contributions that the focus in Brussels is very much, in terms of Brexit, is very much on the post-Brexit impact of the budget of the Commission and the Union. But there are, and I suppose we take every opportunity to re-emphasise that, as we did with the visiting delegation to Dublin, including Jan and Isabel recently, to reinforce the Brexit implications for Ireland, which will be impacted in a way that no other member state will be impacted as a consequence of the Brexit. And depending on the kind of Brexit that occurs, our own economy, our GDP, and we're just a recovering economy, could be impacted as much by between 4 and 9% on an annual basis between when Brexit actually happens and 2030. So again, I want to use that opportunity to reinforce that it's not just the impact on the budget, but it's the impact on those regions, and Ireland will be impacted in a way that no other country will be impacted in terms of Brexit. Just one other point in relation to the pillars and the priorities that you mentioned. Obviously, immigration, which impacts greatly on some member states who are very much at the front line. And you mentioned defence. For militarily neutral countries, just the term defence can be quite politically charged. But I know as an elected representative that includes a significant investment in cyber security. And I just think the language around that is very important when that budget decision is being presented, that it's not essentially a burgeoning of the military defence budget, but that cyber defence is a key part of that as well. Thanks, Mr. President.
Merci.
Thank you. Maria del Marangulo has the floor next.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. The next multi-annual financial framework has to be part and parcel of our vision for a stronger and more integrated Europe. And a stronger and more integrated Europe is a Europe that is in a better position to push forward with the priorities of the citizens and to meet their demands, at least as far as we see it. And we've always been able to promote economic cohesion and improve the way the internal market works. So that was the key mission of the MFF. And I think that we have to protect the role of the MFF in the future. This is extremely important if we are to have economic prosperity and employment in Europe, and it contributes to the well-being and prosperity of our citizens. If we're to have an integrated single market, we have to think about important aspects such as competitiveness and sustainable development costs. And of course, the CAP plays a very important role in countries such as Spain. And then cohesion is another source of expenditure, but it's also a source of resources. It's about investing in Europe. That's the other way we have to look at this. Over the last few years, we've seen how important the cohesion policy has been, and we've also seen what a key role the CAP has played. All of this and the EU's investment policy has helped with convergence, has given certain more laggard regions a push. They have helped with competitiveness, and that is why they should be seen as a source of resources. It has contributed to more economic and social cohesion. So these are resources. This is an important investment in the future of Europe and the future of the well-being of our citizens. Now, on the new system of resources of the MFF the MFF has become a complex instrument that often makes transparency difficult. The post-2020 MFF is a good opportunity to streamline the resource side of the MFF so we can get rid of rebates and come up with a system that that is linked to basic national income. We think that that is the best indicator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear colleagues, Brexit it is not a reason for cutting funds, as many could say. In spite of many regretting UK leaving the Union, the moment could be seen as an opportunity to clarify what kind of Europe we want, setting up priorities, and then providing the necessary budget for achieving the objectives from both national contributions and European own resources. But we need firstly to choose that vision. Sometimes we feel that we have an upside-down situation, having already the money and trying to see who is the strongest to grab them in. You remember the long night of knives in the European Council, as many times passed in the past. Business as usual concerning MFF do not work anymore for different opposite reasons. What we want with the Union has to be well explained, in the same time forgetting democratic support. A limited flexibility is needed, but without giving up having set up expenditure to finance European policies, drafting the budget following better a flexicurity principle would get stronger support, I mean. The principle of European added value maintained as well. But the main added value for the European Union is keeping it alive and strong under the pressure of populist Eurosceptic trends, and making the Eurosystem functional for not killing itself, the Union. At the moment, I'd like to stress only a few functions the European budget is expected to fulfill. Financing cohesion in an economic and social divided Union, creating a macroeconomic stability function at European level, strengthening the redistribution function to deal with inequality, and mainly, more important, reinventing European public goods and allocating funds for them. We don't need and we don't support any finance minister without providing him or her with the instrument of intervention. That means a budget. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Perhaps I could ask the two rapporteurs to draw some conclusions. Perhaps I can give them 2 minutes each.
Vous voulez que je dise oui ou non, hein?
You want me to say yes or no?
As usually in politics, we are different opinions, and that's what makes the political life rich. And I think some of us are sharing the view that we would like to clarify what we want from European Union, and we want more from European Union. It doesn't mean that we would like to have a bigger budget, but we would like to very clearly say, do we want to keep the same standard of not the same budget? Do you want to keep the same standard like before Brexit, after Brexit? Or do you want to change the standard of policies of European Union? If we want to keep the same standard of the policies, it's absolutely necessary to well define how much it will cost, and of course how we can find the money, either through national contribution or through own resources. This is not the questions to make the bigger budget. We are not have the ambition to make the bigger budget, but we would like, as a parliament, being from different political groups, we would like to very clearly say that what we think is absolutely not to reduce the ambitions of the European Union, and if the governments decide, and they decided, to add new elements like defence, like security, so we are asking the questions, okay, we agree, but if we add the new challenges, where is money? Where is money for new challenges? I mean, either we define the challenges and we have to give money, or not. So I think, of course, we are thinking we should add these challenges, but it's absolutely inevitable to well clarify where is the money, and it would be absolutely necessary to reinforce the budget in a reasonable way.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Thomas, you have 1 minute. I just wanted to clarify one important point. It's not about increasing the budget. It's about leaving it at the level it finds itself before the UK leaves, because not only are we not ready to reduce our ambitions, it's not just me. The Council doesn't want that either. So we even have new ambitions. So we have to make sure that there is coherence and consistency. And let me say to Mr. Mulder, that is exactly what we're saying. No new programs without new resources. So if we need new programs, then we need new resources. And this is what we've been working on. And my last point is to congratulate the Portuguese Parliament for this excellent initiative. I would like to see this happen in all national parliaments. And of course, I would be very happy to meet you, and so would my other colleagues in the Budgets Committee.
Seconde séquence.
Thank you. Before we move on to session 2, and I give the floor to Mrs. Evgenia Angelova, please get ready to put forward a plea. You're in national parliaments. Isn't there expenditure that, because of globalization and its effects in the member states, aren't as effective as we expect? And hasn't the time come, in the case of certain actions, to make sure that they're pushed up to the European level? In other words, if the European budget were to increase, then we should see the national budgets go down by the same amount. This is what would allow us to prove that there is European added value when it comes to space, defence, security, migration. Maybe some expenditure in the member states no longer efficient and effective, and therefore we could envisage this being included in the European budget. We have to be able to show that an increase in the EU budget, more public spending there, doesn't also lead to to increases in the national budgets. I'll stop here. Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Alors, nous devons changer les.
We need to swap rapporteurs. Mr. Lewandowski and Mr. Dupre, please come up here to top table. Daniele Viotti will be leaving us. And Alain Lamassoure will be coming up to the top table.
Dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to be able to co-chair, of course, with Mr. Artui, the meeting of the budget committees of the national parliaments with the budget committee of the European Parliament. Of course, you know that Bulgaria is taking over the presidency of the Council of the European Union for the first time. So this is new for us, but we're working in the directions to find a way to be as effective as possible. The European Parliament and the national parliaments have proven on a number of occasions that they're by no means rivals or competitors. I'm convinced that we can actually work together in the common interest of the European citizens, strengthening their democratic voice. Our joint efforts can be a powerful tool to bring citizens closely to the European Union. In my opinion, the strengthening of this fruitful cooperation should be a milestone for each European policy. Of course, the mutual work of the European Union parliamentarians is particularly important in today's world of rising populism and widespreading lack of confidence in the public institutions in general. We should remember the essence of the European project as defined by Jacques Delors. Cooperation, competition, solidarity. Competition that stimulates, cooperation that strengthens, and solidarity that unites. We need to use the common political and intellectual effort to find the optimal solution that would reflect the will of all Europeans to continue together on the road ahead, of course, overcoming the difficulties. Young generations and educational institutions have to play a major role in the future of Europe by bringing new energy and fresh ideas to reform the European Union in order to meet fully the high expectations of our citizens. It's particularly worrying that for the first time since the Second World War, there is a real risk that the generations of today's young adults can end up less well off than their parents. Today, too many Europeans consider the Union as either too distant or too interfering with their everyday today lives. They demand from the European Union to deliver practical solutions to the crisis we face, whether it would be a financial, economic, social, cultural one. Most importantly, they ask how the European Union is improving their standard of living. And they expect a clear answer. It's up to us, all of us parliamentarians, to provide that answer and to be absolutely honest about that answer that we give to them. Otherwise, we would end up in the realm of the so-called post-truth. The story of Europe is one of peace, democracy, solidarity and freedom, but also prosperity, equality, well-being and sustainability. It's worthwhile remembering the principles that unite us as Europeans and the shared successes we have enjoyed together. In times like these, the European Union needs strength and determination to keep unity and to better respond to the expectations of its citizens in the areas of security, economy, social inclusion, environmental protection, and, of course, climate change. It's essential for Europe to embrace technological change in order to ensure a prosperous and sustainable future for all of our citizens. Additionally, while addressing the challenges of a rapidly changing world, Europe must offer its citizens both protection and new opportunities. Sensitive topics such as future of the European budget after 2020 could gain legitimacy only if they are subject to a wide public discussion, if we listen carefully for what our citizens' concerns are and we take them into account. Communication of the European Union's action should be among our most important objectives because even revolutionary ideas and solutions could fail. Positive repercussions if they were not properly communicated and get citizens' backing. The political vision of the Multiannual Financial Framework 21-27 is of key importance for the social, economic, developmental development of the Union in the next decade. As we expect the European Commission's proposal, we should be equally focused on the revenue and the expenditure sides of our common budget. These debates are very serious and will certainly go into detail as soon as we have the draft calculations of the European Commission put on the table. And I try to limit my time as much as possible on my opening remarks, but I would like now to pass the floor on to Mr. Janusz Lewandowski and Gerard Deprez, co-rapporteurs on own resources for their remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. We are two rapporteurs, but one voice. And welcome people elected by the people in various countries of Europe. We are discussing the revenue side of the budget now, and we are discussing in presence of my friend Alain Lamassoure, who is sitting somewhere, yeah, visible. And he is a living memory of the previous attempts of how to modify, how to modernize and reform the revenue side of the budget. Not very successful attempts, but we are trying again. We are not discouraged by the previous attempts. We are trying again. Also to encourage Commission to be brave in this respect. Last time I was behind the proposal by the Commission with two candidates, financial transaction tax and simplified VAT, but simplification of VAT as a revenue for the budget was equal to elimination of the British rebate, so the answer from London was immediately no. And this was the end of the story. What was preserved was only the enhanced cooperation between states on financial transaction tax. But we are trying again because Brexit could be, in this respect, window of opportunity. Perhaps member states could be more flexible given that we have new challenges and it somehow should be financed with fresh money. Therefore, we are trying in the resolution to be voted this week in the Budgetary Committee to be brave, but not provocative. Not being provocative is meaning that we are not suggesting any treaty changes. We ensure fiscal sovereignty of the national parliaments. This is the taxing is the prerogative of the national parliaments, and it should stay as a prerogative of national parliaments. But we know that the paradox of the existing system, not only complex, non-transparent, is that the more of GNI contribution, the more member states see the contributions as the cost and not investment into the European Union, and the more the logic of jus retour is prevailing over negotiations, therefore everybody is being judged his success or his failure, or whether on net position. This is so easy to criticize the existing system, but the paradox is that so strongly criticized system is practically stable since late 80s. Therefore, our attempt now, and of course what is most controversial is what candidates for new resources. I can say that together with Gerard Deprez, we are trying to compromise several candidates. No one is perfect. So again, VAT simplified. Without the Brits, it could be a little bit easier. Then financial transaction tax that is not Tobin tax, that is not even financial activity tax, but this is taxing transactions in order to reduce the propensity to speculate in the financial markets. And this is not about taxing private households in their normal daily operations. This is different type of financial transaction tax. What is coming in our proposal is also the eventual share of corporate taxation, extended or not extended, but for this we need a lot of expertise to digital sector. And for my country of origin, the most difficult is to find something that is promoting climate change, fighting climate change and environmental type of taxation. So at least in our draft proposal, what is most neutral is so-called carbon border adjustment tax, because this is not so country-specific. It is about taxing imports coming from the countries without something comparable to our ETS, to our trading and emissions system. Of course, there are some other revenues already to be included in the European Union. Some of them are predictable, contributions from the third countries, or salary, or taxing salary of those employed in the institutions. Some less predictable. This is about fines. And here is the short story of our long proposal, given that we are now trying to encourage Günther Oettinger as a commissioner to go with own resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewandowski. Mr. Dupré, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Of course, it goes without saying that I agree with what my colleague and co-rapporteur, Mr. Lewandowski, said. Now, our position in a nutshell should be seen against a more general backdrop. It's clear that we need new own resources in the EU. There are some in this room that have said that the European budget is too much of a burden and that it's keeps going up. But if you look at the EU budget in relation to the GNI, you'll see that in 1993, or rather between 93 and 96, the European budget accounted for 1.25% of GNI, while the 2014 to 2020, the MFF, accounted for 1.03% of GNI. So therefore, the European budget over the last few years has been shrinking in proportion to the creation of wealth. Often we have this distinction between net contributors and net beneficiaries. Those who are net contributors don't always take into account what they get out of the entire European system. The fact that some economies or some countries benefit greatly from a single market with harmonized rules in the case of goods and services, and the fact that we have a single currency. So this mechanical distinction between net contributors and net beneficiaries is artificial. If we're in favor of new own resources at the moment is because we have to offset a loss, a shortfall, if you like, due to Brexit. We'll have a gaping hole there because of it. And some of you mentioned a point that probably reflects the concerns of others, and that is we have to do better in certain areas. External border control. There's so much at stake. This has to be done if we are to get a handle on the migration situation. And then, of course, we need it for internal political equilibrium in our countries. The Commission has published a document saying that if you want to bolster external borders, there are four scenarios. A minimalist one that will cost 4 billion over 7 years, and a maximalist scenario, which will mean that we will have proper external border control system that will be efficient, and this will cost 150 billion over 7 years. So it will be up to us to decide which scenario we want, depending on our priorities and what kind of resources we'll be allocating over the next few years. There was a question put saying, you're not going to create a European level, will you? tomorrow, the Commission with the Council and the Parliament aren't going to say, oh, excuse me, a tax, a European tax. It's not us that are going to decide with the Council. As Mr. Lewandowski, we're not tampering with fiscal sovereignty, and all our own resources proposals aim to harness taxes that are already out there. Before, when we had this percentage of VAT harmonized preferably, we're not coming up with a new VAT tax. It's about a percentage of it going into the budget. The same with the CCCTB. And the same will apply if we agree on a financial transaction tax in the future. So, and the same would happen with a green tax. We're not creating European taxes. We're taking resources that are collected by the member states within the framework of other taxes and putting them into the European budget. Now, for those of you who are worried, and I do understand that there are some national parliaments and colleagues that think that the fairest contribution is the national one through the budget because it's based on the GNI, we're not going to get rid of national contributions. We're just going to reduce the relative size of them. So over the 7-year period, we would like to see a 40% contribution of national contributions, and this reduction would be offset by other own resources. And so we would make sure that we have, we'll make sure that we have a balanced package. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dupré. And now I pass the floor to Mr. Alain Lamassoure, member of the High-Level Group on Own Resources. Mr. Lamassoure, it'd be interesting to hear your remarks. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I would like to pick up on 2-3 points that were mentioned by my colleagues before. We have to understand that this overhaul of EU finances cannot be avoided. It's because of what is happening with revenue and the huge drop in national contributions because the UK is leaving. So that on the one hand, and on the other, the huge increase related to our needs. I mean, there have been decisions taken by the governments, and this, of course, they've been confirmed by national parliaments. These decisions relate to migration, the fight against Islamist terrorism, and the fight against climate change. Of course, there's also the new partnership that we want to set up with Africa. So if we are to meet these new financial needs, or rather to meet these financial needs up till now, we have set up with different funds, trust funds, other funds with other names, so a piecemeal approach, if you like. But now we have to put an end to the squandering of resources and come up with a common funding system. Secondly, this reform is not a revolution. As Gérard Deprez said, we're not transferring fiscal sovereignty. It will still be the member states and the national parliaments that will be sovereign when it comes to taxation. The EU will be a kind of authority, almost like the local and regional authorities, but at a higher level, as we have in France, that will allow regions and cities to benefit from these financial resources. So the national parliament that is sovereign creates these resources and then gives this revenue, so taxes collected, to the local regional authorities, and it is up to them to decide on the basis of a certain agreement. So We have to bear in mind that during the first 20 years of what we called the European Economic Community, the European Economic Community worked solely on the basis of own resources, without any national contributions. That was in the treaties from day one. So customs duties that brought in a lot of money at a time where we had a protectionist policy, that was one own resource. Then we had the VAT resource that was well designed and that worked very well, but now that's been watered down. And then there was a tax that we would even call a federal tax, and that was accepted by everyone, that was based on the coal and steel company turnover on the basis of the ECSC, the European Coal and Steel Community, and this worked for 20 years. And it's only in the past 20 years that the system has developed and has actually been turned on its head, because now we find ourselves with these national contributions. So it's not a revolution, but it's a return to how we started. I fully agree with the suggestions put forward by the Parliament rapporteurs, but let me say that if the governments and finance ministers are unanimous on a certain own resource, it will be up to the national parliaments to have a final word, and each and every parliament will have a right to veto this, so this should make you feel less concerned and more at ease. Now let me pick up on what Chairman Arthuis said. We need to make sure that for every extra euro spent in Brussels, we spend €1 less in the member states, in the national budget. And if something will be done more on a European level, then we need to transfer the appropriate resources, both financial resources and human resources, and make sure that we have taxes backing that. And then let me remind you that we're talking about the same taxpayer. It's the national taxpayer that is paying his or her taxes, so that whether we're talking about regional policies or national policies or European policies. So we have to make sure that the transfer of, rather the fact that we're changing where the decision is taking place won't increase the cost. So I suggest that we have a network of our national audit institutions and European Court of Auditors that will check that every time we set up any European agencies, or every time we bolster a European agency and give it more staff, for example, or more resources, that we have this that we check that the principle of subsidiarity is really respected. Thank you.
For taking track of the time, Mr. Lamassoure. And now we have the national parliaments. First I have Mr. Szlachta, Andrzej Szlachta from Poland. 2 minutes, please.
Dziękuję Pani Przewodnicząca. Korzystając z sugestii Pana Przewodniczącego, że parlamenty narodowe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to take advantage of what the Vice President has suggested, and that is that national parliaments should feel free to share their views. So I'll take this opportunity to share with you the views of the Polish government and the Polish Parliament. They're certainly willing to get embroiled in a debate on the budget for the future. We know there are new challenges and priorities, particularly priorities relating to the security of our citizens. Security should, in this context, be understood in a broader sense, not just military security. We talk about things like energy security. That's also important. So we are in favour of the Nord Stream gas pipeline number 2. That's important. We also think that implementing new priorities should not be at the expense of already existing priorities. That's particularly important for cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy. We believe that the challenges we face for the future mean that all parliaments, all politicians ultimately, need to be ambitious in terms of the size of the EU's budget. We don't share the viewpoint according to which it's all about cutting the EU's budget at all costs. We think that the proposal made by Commissioner Oettinger is well worth looking into. He proposed increasing the EU's budget to 1.1% of GNI. We believe that that's what's most important for the next stage. The EU's budget has to be increased, and that's particularly important in terms of what's also important is looking at how own resources can make an additional contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next person intervening is Mr. Björn Wiesel from Sweden.
Tack. Jag vill först kommentera budgetdiskussionen. Den svenska
First of all, I'd like to say a word or two about the budget discussion. You know what Sweden's position is. We're pro-European. We support the EU, and indeed, post-Brexit, support for the EU has increased. I want to be able to go back to citizens and say to them that their money is going to improve in the European Union. At the moment, we're hearing in some member states that they want more EU responsibilities. But I think in a way, some of the kind of standard logic has to be reversed following Brexit in looking at addressing migration and climate change. We need to find alternative sources than the standard EU budget. I think savings would certainly be possible in the EU budget on agriculture. If we want to boost taxes, it shouldn't necessarily have to mean just for the creation of more social Europe. I think we've got to start thinking about whether EU taxation would not actually mean that the possibility for member states to tax their citizens would decrease. There's a balance there. We need to address this. How can we bring about changes without reducing member states' room for maneuver on taxation being limited? That could restrict citizens' trust.
Fernandes from Portugal.
Merci,
Thanks very much. I think this is a very important discussion. And it's also a discussion which very easily can drift into populism. We're hearing people who want a bigger budget, but they don't want new own resources either. Now, with the current system, it means more national contributions, full stop. And that means more taxation imposed on taxpayers. And we've got to explain very clearly that if we want to increase the budget, the easiest way forward is resources that do not penalize the citizens. There are others out there who want to keep the current system. That's national contributions. That's what the system is based on. And there, the finance ministers behave as if they own the budget. And some have a bigger sense of ownership than others. And this system also means we draw the fell distinction between net beneficiary and net contributor, net payer, net recipient. Now, I'd remind you that 85% of the budget comes from the EU member state contributions. Germany and France account for 38% of the budget of the 28. And citizens, all citizens, should feel a sense of ownership about this budget. All member states benefit from the EU's budget. even those that pay in more than they get back mathematically benefit from public goods that we have? I don't know. Do citizens know that 94% of the budget is spent on investment and 80% ultimately flows back to member states? I mean, to conclude, one of these days we're going to start having to realize the cost of the lack of some of the policies. What would happen if these policies didn't exist? The UK is a net contributor, and I think they've understood how much it's going to cost to leave the EU. And the cost is far higher than the cost that they would pay to stay.
The floor has Mrs. Sabine Thielay from France. Please keep the time. It's 2 minutes, no more.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. When you listen to the debate, or if you've been following the debate from the outset, it's clear that what we have primarily is a political problem, a problem of political will. I think we all agree we can't avoid reform any longer. Fair enough. But I'd like to say, do we have a shared destiny? Is that what our community is about? And this is a question that we shouldn't just reply to. Our citizens and taxpayers should too. So I think these questions have to be asked now. If we national parliamentarians are supposed to accept the budget, nonetheless we've got to account to our voters and taxpayers. And I think perhaps it's time to follow a French idea to carry out citizens' consultations, an idea of Mr. Macron's. 20-odd member states have agreed to go along with this. So I agree. Let's ask these questions. What are our citizens' priorities? What are the challenges they feel that the European level should reply to? I think when we understand that, we'd have more room for manoeuvre in terms of what we can decide about the budget. Thank you.
Being punctual. And last, we have Mrs. Isabella Thomas, rapporteur on the MFF.
Oui, merci.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just take a minute of your time to say that we have a high-level working group that Mr. Lamassoure participates in, and we have the Parliament as well, and both groupings have worked on the same idea and broadly converged. They agree that member states and national budgets should benefit from own resources. What exactly does that mean? Well, it means that at least in part, some of these own resources should beef up national budgets a little bit to ease the burden of the EU budget, if you like. It could add room for manoeuvre for national budgets so that the EU doesn't feel like such a burden for national budgets. The second point I'd make is that the proposal made by rapporteur are very careful not to generate additional tax burdens on taxpayers. No, it's about, his ideas is to ensure that those that don't benefit from what we do and yet don't pay. I mean, there are all sorts of benefits out there, education and so forth. So that it's at this level that we are making proposals.
Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. We're out of time. I would only give the floor to our main speakers if they want for like 30 seconds or 1 minute just to wrap up. Anybody would like to?
Okay, let's sum up a little bit. We are talking about new own resources, but this is not about neglecting GNI contribution. This is fair because this is up to the rich or less rich countries, and this is predictable. This is a sort of automatic adjustment in the European budget. So-called own resources are less predictable, and the rest is the question of political will, really. Vous avez raison. La volonté politique décisive, vraiment. How to make mission impossible so far into mission possible. My hope is with Bulgarian presidency. They are dealing in May as a presidency with the proposal of Günther Oettinger. Then we have Austria, and so far in my memory, Austria was not the biggest fan of new own resources, but this is decisive 6 months. If we want to have MFF finalized, Austria is decisive since July to December 2018, and here is my question mark of how to make Mission Impossible more possible. Thank you.
Oui, Madame la Présidente. Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. This was a brief exchange of views, but there are some points that clearly emerged. If we are to justify the means we're asking for and the expenditure that the EU engages in, we need to agree on this shared destiny. What brings us together, what we can do together, what we want to do together, what we want to make a success of. And I think that in the course of this discussion, we see the challenges before us emerging, because there are going to be some challenges to strike the balance in the MFF. How are we going to bring this off? How are member states going to bring it off? We want to strike a balance with current policies. We've heard robust defences of the CAP and cohesion, but at the same time we've got these new challenges that are going to require more and more funding and cooperation if we are genuinely to be a community based on a shared destiny, as we heard. Thank you.
Monsieur, thank you for understanding. I just want to remind everybody and that's how I want to conclude, the slogan of the Bulgarian presidency of the European Council is United we stand strong. So even though everybody is working in their own parliament, we should be united and we should work in that way. And I want to remind that the dinner is at 7 at 19:00 at the European House of European History, and it starts at 7. Again, we have about 5 minutes. Thank you for being here.
Nous attendons beaucoup de la présidence bulgare, en fait.